Hi.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
How y'all doing?
Good and you?
Good. Yeah.
Doing real good now that I got the internet back up, and hopefully the wind will calm down out there. Although they're calling for snow this evening after almost 70 degrees yesterday.
Wow.
No.
Yes.
Snow in
So are you
April.
geared up?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy times. Crazy times.
Absolutely.
No matter where you are, which corner of the world you're in today, crazy times. Like when Diana sent me the message first before I saw your email about the power outage, I was like, yeah, I can relate to that. I know that feeling.
Well, we live on
Especially,
almost 6 acres of land that backs up to Forever Wild. And, next week is brush pickup day. And we've already hauled out a lot of brush from the wooded area. I think we're going to have to go back there and haul out a lot more due to this wind.
yeah.
So here we are in
Okay,
the
just
Talking
for
Back to Suicide podcast, right? And I am eager to learn about you, Kevin, and I'm going to defer to Kino to start the conversation with you.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
first of all, thank you both for having me here today. I really do appreciate it.
Glad to have you.
Okay, so just for the listeners, if there's delayed in my response, it's because of network issues that I'm having at the moment. So at times I'm not going to hear Kevin or Diana that clearly, but I will respond as soon as I just pick up the bits and pieces.
We're going to go with the flow.
Like,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, no, this is terrible. And the weather where I'm at the moment is not making this easier for me.
And it gets, it's stressful because we want to listen, we want to respond,
Yes.
right? It's tough.
Well, Kino, if it helps,
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
actually get us started here a little bit
Yeah.
as to, how I got invited onto this show.
Hmm.
And I was on a podcast with Kino, what was it, maybe a month or so ago now. And we were talking about, I'm an author, and it's my second act and what I'm doing in the books I'm writing, etc. And one of the things we got to talking about, we got onto the subject of gun control. And then I I happen to have during COVID done a lot of research on gun control. And I don't know if you can see the thing over my head here that says Remington on it.
No, I don't see it, but tell us about it.
Okay, well, my hometown is Ilion, New York. And Ilion is the birthplace of the Remington rifle. And the factory was still there up until last year when the political climate in the state got too much for the company. And they essentially moved out of town, took their jobs with them, and went south. So Kino and I were talking a little bit about that. And I was mentioning to him some of the stats I had found from the FBI database. And this is while I was researching it, all on gun control and what are the current facts and figures for deaths due to guns. And what I had found, and it doesn't vary a lot on a year to year basis, was that 70 to 90,000 deaths are created a year due to action by a gun. Now, when I say by a gun, it's the person holding the gun. And it could be everything from a accidental shooting to other things. And when I got to investigating it, I found there were certain categories that were the top two. And I come from a corporate America environment, worked there for over 40 plus years. And I always went by the 80-20 principle. You spend the least amount of time really getting the 80% done, and you can spend forever getting that remainder 20% done. So looking at it, I wanted to know what were the top 80% of causes for gun deaths. And it came down to two categories. Suicide was number one by far, almost 71%. And the second highest category at almost 18% was gang-related deaths. The two of them together, almost 89%. So if we just attacked those two as a society, what we could do to lower those numbers. Now, I'll go towards the accidental ones, because we all believe, I don't know anyone who doesn't, that, one death is one death too many when it comes to an accidental thing. But when I got to researching it and looking at it, there's almost the same number of accidental deaths as there are accidental drownings in the US on a yearly basis. When you think about that, we're not going to do away with water. We're not going to do away with the backyard pools. We're not going to do away with people going to the beaches, etc. These things are going to happen. All I can do is to tell folks, be better prepared, learn to swim, always be with a buddy, things like that. And when it comes to an accidental death, come on, there's gun safety courses out there that people can take. And I know, in fact, in my family line, I have a nephew who's a sergeant in the police force. And so he comes home at night, nothing's in the chamber, the gun gets locked up. These are the types of precautions you have to have. And I have a sister-in-law and brother-in-law who are and they live in Washington State, by the way. They're very avid gun enthusiasts, and they take all the safety courses. They have a huge safe in their house that once that goes in there, it's locked. There's two of them that know the combination. The kids do not touch it. So these are the kinds of precautions we can take. But when it comes to suicide, what can we do? And my wife and I got talking, and I said, "Hun," and this was before we were coming onto this show, I said, "Hun, I don't know if I know enough about the subject matter to really be able to talk in detail and talk with some meaning and emphasis behind it." And then she says, "Well, no, think about it." And as we got talking, we realized our family and friends, 3 suicides, 1 murder. And when I got to thinking about that, one was my cousin. She was in an extremely bad relationship, no children, couldn't take it anymore, murder, suicide. And that was it. And then where my wife worked, it was a smaller company, 80 people in it. They all knew each other. One committed suicide, one attempted it. So I said, well, it does touch me. And then when I was working, this is the first job I had, one of the colleagues I had, his girlfriend stabbed him to death. I'm thinking, okay, I have been around this. It impacts me. And the more I began to look, I began to see that a lot of people are impacted by this. And then I'm listening to the radio a few weeks back. A teenager jumps off the high school roof and commits murder.
I read about that. Yes.
Oh, and the more I hear about this, the more I realize that 18 to about 35 is a major target area for a lot of suicides and things I didn't know. And about, maybe a week or so after that, a second teenager went to jump out a second-story window. They caught him, and I'm pretty sure it was a him, but they caught the person, and they were able to make sure that that person got the proper help they need. And Diane, all I could think of is over the years, we as a society, from government on down, have made changes in our medical environment for treating these kinds of folks with these kinds of illnesses. And has that led to it? And then I got to say, last night I'm sitting down watching a little TV. Commercial came on for a kind of drug, and I think it was a weight loss drug, by the way. And they said one of the side effects is suicide. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, how is suicide a side effect? But these are the things I don't know about. And, you know, we need to learn much, much more about this. Now, I've rambled on along for a little bit here, but as I got to thinking about this more and more, for me, it came down to one word. Now, others may not see this word as being the same, but to me, it is the word hope. And if people feel they've lost all hope, then that's it. They feel it's over with. And then they take that next step. And hope can be so powerful. And I'm remembering back to a boss I had, and we were talking one day and, you know, just about our family and that kind of stuff. And come to find out, his dad was a bank robber and was in prison. And here, this guy totally went a different way and went and got his college degree and all this. And now he's in management position, etc. And we got to talking, and I kind of made the statement of one of the quotes I live by is, the decisions we make dictate the life we lead. And I mean, to me, that is a very powerful statement, because decisions are powerful. And in the case of suicide, that decision, that may be the last decision you make. And so we need to change that. But my boss came back to me with something, and he says, that may be fine and good, but what about those people who don't have choice? I said, wait a minute, everyone's got a choice. He says, if you lose hope, you don't have the choice. And that stuck with me all this time. So, I mean, that's kind of, you know, where I come from on this whole thing. And we need to do so much more to help those folks, because I looked further and did the research on what are the categories for folks in suicide. And as you can imagine, you know, first responders are high on the list. Ex-military and current military are very high on the list. But I was also surprised to find doctors, lawyers,
and psychiatrists,
yes,
construction workers.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you've studied this. I was flabbergasted by these. And it's the type of thing that, come on now, we can do better in our society with this. And now I will tell you right up front, I'm a big one for, I'll decide what to do with my money, you decide what to do with yours. But when it comes to this, and it comes to our first responders and military folks, man, they write a blank check with their body every single day they go out there. And by God, we got to help them. That you know, that's just my belief in it.
Yes. There was a article I remember reading. It goes back a number of years ago, but it was in 2019. It was an article in the New York Times, and the heading was, "Suicide kills more people in the military than combat."
Yes. Yeah. I can believe that. And Diane, it seems that right now, and this will go back in time a little bit and then I'll come forward, but it's almost like they want to make suicide, I don't want to call it common, but your choice to do. And when I think back, I came up through the age of Dr. Kevorkian, and you probably know that name. And now I was reading just the other day, and again, all this stuff, I was thinking, what would I talk about today? And this material just kept coming to me. And I'm going to hold you up something here. I don't know if the camera can get it. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Tell me more. I can see it, but tell me more.
I'll read you what it says. Switzerland has approved the use of the Sarco machine,
Yes.
which enables painless assisted suicide within 1 minute.
I know what you're talking about. Yes.
You know, I will say this, I'm a believer in the Almighty, and that's just not the way it's supposed to be. And I'm just hoping that by talking more about this and by getting folks to realize the sun is going to come up again tomorrow. You know, give yourself that one more day, that one more minute, that one more hour. Don't do it. And seek the help, because there is help there. There's not enough. There is by far not enough, but there is help there. And as I've told my friends and told my family, you ever get into that kind of despair, call me. I don't care if it's 1 o'clock in the freaking morning, call me. And we'll sit up all freaking night and talk. You know, it's just not right. So
The idea for the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention, the words hold on have to do with what you're talking about, right? Hold on. Don't act on that suicidal thought.
yes.
Right?
Yes.
There can be people who intentionally plan for the suicide. That's one route. There's also those who impulsively act on the suicidal thought, and that could be within 30 minutes down to 10 minutes of having that thought. And that's why, especially, not having access to lethal means becomes so important, right? Because if I have that gun readily available, right, and possibly that gun combined with I've drunk alcohol, that gun, and I just had a terrible argument with my significant other, or I just found out I'm in financial bad straits.
Yep.
That having that weapon, especially the gun, it could end my life. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have that weapon available, that gives me the time and the distance to be able to either try to calm myself or to reach out for help, be that a friend, calling 988, going to church. I mean, something. Right?
Something. Yes. The way I kind of look at it too is, if I was, pardon the language, hell-bent for election to do myself in, I would find anything at my disposal to do it. Pills, gun, knife. One of those attempted suicide at my wife's work was done by slashing the wrist. And the good news is they didn't cut deep enough, so they were able to save the person. But, to me, it's got to start even before that. We've got to try to reach them somehow. I don't know how, but I know we have to do a better job. Just think about it. If we could cut the suicide by gun in half, what did we just do to all gun-related death numbers? We just chopped that like almost in half. And that here's the thing, Diane, that gets me. Our political representatives know this data. It's the FBI's own data. Why they don't act more on it, it's not just gun control, which I know serves for a lot of sound bites, but it's actually doing something to help those that we know are in those first two primary categories. Use the 80-20 principle to start, and then we can, further chisel away at the remainder. But let's hit it where it really is the majority of it right now. And they're not doing it. And I have my own political beliefs, and I don't want to get into that here. But, I do believe more needs to be done.
And, a very high risk factor in terms of population is older white men.
I can understand that. I have a buddy whose wife, now my wife and I just celebrated 49 years. My buddy is only a few years behind me, but his wife passed due to cancer. And that was just in the last year and a half. I can understand that because I know he went through a little bit of a depression afterwards. Who wouldn't? This is your soulmate for all these years. And now they're gone. So I can understand how older folks, to me, it may be regardless of the color, but the stats are showing that it's white, then that's what it is. But I can understand that. I know my mom, she lived to be almost 92, always kept saying when we would visit, I'm glad I'm on this end of my life. And I would say, Mom, you got a lot to live for. Now, unfortunately for her, as it has with a lot of people, it was as a result of a fall that took her life. But, to me, I look at people, that same buddy of mine, his dad turned 99. Wow. And I mean, when he turns 100, we're going to the birthday party. We're going to have some fun. It's amazing. And I, think my buddy will also live a long life having that kind of DNA and always been healthy. But it comes back again for me to that word hope. Do not give up on that word.
Well, how would you, Kevin, define the word hope? What is hope?
That is an interesting thing because I think it may mean a little something different to different people, and it can be both used positively. I don't want to say used negatively, but not used when you're into a negative situation like a suicide. But hope is to know that there's something more that you can, and I'll use your term, hold on to get you through this spot to something better. And that's the crossover. And I'm going to deviate here just a little bit because in my last book, I call it Signs, the Veil is Thinner Than We Imagine. And that's because I've had many interesting circumstances happen. Friends of mine have had it, and people of notoriety have had circumstances happen that can't be described by circumstance. This is something of another level, something beyond, and that's why Beyond the Veil. With that said, I interviewed a basketball coach here in Rochester. He made not just U.S. news, but international news. And that was because he offered an autistic kid by the name of Jason McElwain. People call him J-Mac, and you can look that up. J-Mac it was actually 2006, I believe. So it's a little bit dated now, but let me tell you the story I had with the coach and why the word hope came up. That senior year, the coach went to JMac and said, JMac, I'm going to give you a gift. And that gift was being given because JMac, starting in 9th grade, wanted to be on the varsity basketball team. But he was on the autism scale, and he was like 5'8", 100 and nothing. If you remember the movie Rudy, that is kind of very similar. But the coach at that time, through some prodding by JMac's mom, decided to create a position in 9th grade to name him the student assistant team manager, and brought him onto the team. And JMac would be at every game. He would show up for every practice. At the games, he'd wear a shirt and tie. At the practice, he was always getting the balls of water, rallying the people, keeping their spirits up. Well, that senior year, the coach told him, says, look, I'm going to have you suit up one game. Here we go again, back to Rudy. I'm going to have you suit up for one game, but I can't guarantee you will play. So the coach had him on the bench, suited up, and this happens to be senior night. Well, the kids in the school all heard about this opportunity, and they all loved JMac. So they showed up with JMac placards, and that kind of thing. Well, in the last 4 minutes, the team, which happened to be Greece Athena, was way ahead. The coach pointed down the bench to JMac, get in. So JMac gets up, checks in, runs out onto the court. First 2 balls that the team gave him, air balls. He missed big time. From that point on, he sunk 3-point after 3-point after 3-point. He was the team high scorer. Now you got to remember, this is now down to less than 3 minutes in the game. They figured out, had he played the whole game, he probably would have scored over 60 points at that rate. And it made news because one of the kids who was filming it for game footage was told, keep the camera on the floor, watch the players. Well, he happened to also pan the audience and get everybody cheering and all of this. And that made the nightly news. Well, then it went national. President George Bush flew into Rochester, landed, met JMac on the tarmac. Well, what happens now is this starts to go international, and the news is all over. And you're seeing this replay on nightly news. Well, he's up for now an ESPY award. He's up against his idol, Kobe Bryant. They go there. He wins the ESPY award for the best, ball game video, whatever section it was being billed for. He wins it. So he now has to give up and give a speech. So all of this, now I go online. I don't care where it is. I'm seeing folks that are in soccer. I'm seeing them in hockey. I'm seeing them in football. I saw it in wrestling, basketball, all giving a kid with disability a chance at their dream. So I interviewed the coach for my book. And I said, Coach, why do you think that is now? It has spread all over the world. He says one word: hope. Hope. Those kids had that in their mind, the hope that one day they could do something of their dreams, something that they loved. And that's what kept them going. So I think it is an extremely powerful word, and I appreciate you letting me tell that story. But the more and more I think about it, man, the word hope is extremely powerful. And I think that's something we need to really hold on. We need to shine it brightly out there and, you know, tell these folks who are thinking about suicide that there is hope, there is tomorrow, there is someone you can reach out to. And that's kind of my message.
Thank you for sharing that true life inspiring story. Okay, wow. I've read that a mnemonic of hope could be hold on, pain ends, right?
Yes.
And again, we're talking about pain ending while you're still alive. Because
Yes.
sometimes a motivation for the suicide can be, I'm in unbearable pain.
Yes.
And the only way out I see is to kill myself.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I met a young woman recently in downtown Portland, Oregon. I had gone to the Maine Public Library. I was putting up a poster for the Hold On campaign's Create Resilience Youth Art Contest for suicide prevention. And I was heading back to my car, and I saw that there was an arts and crafts store. I think it's called Wonderland. And so I had gone into the store and was purchasing some things. And I was also thinking, oh, this is a arts, business, and there may be young people coming to the store, and the contest is open to 13 to 21-year-old Oregonians. So I was sharing the flyer, asking if they could put it up or share it. And then I was telling the young person about the Hold On campaign, and we have a podcast. And this young person, whom I had never met before, she started to share with me about her mental health history and that she had attempted suicide and she would love to be on the podcast. Mm-hmm. We exchanged email addresses. And just the other day, she had emailed me and giving me some of her background. And she shared something interesting, with me and gave like another perspective on the idea of hope and what hope can mean. And she explained that there's a course of treatment called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. And in her DBT program, the welcome back,
okay. So sorry to disturb you, Diana. Look, it's not working out for me, and I'm definitely going to be taken off again. So I never pick up on all that you and Kevin have been speaking about. I heard a lot about hope. It's a strong word, Kevin.
Yes.
Nice word. I just want to give you guys the focus point on why I wanted Kevin to come onto the show, and then you guys can take the conversation from there, because I'm definitely going to get kicked out. So while I got it like this, I thought, let me just give you the focus point. So Kevin, if you recall, when we had our conversation, we spoke about guns and suicide by gun. And you gave a figure, 70,000 to 90,000 of deaths by gun. Out of that, 70% is due to suicide by gun. So, So actually, I wanted, that to be like a key focus point. We've never brought it up on this podcast. So, So let me excuse myself because I'm going to get kicked out. If you guys haven't touched on the gun by suicide issue yet, I just wanted to mention that and bring it in, because, I know, Kevin, you were emotionally, driven by it, so hence why, as I said in our conversation, let me bring you onto this podcast because that is quite serious and that's high numbers, And as you said in our conversation, also, we need to do something about it.
Yeah. Absolutely, Kino. And when we've spoken about that already, and it's the type of thing that, yes, I'm there's that word, hoping that by shining the light more and more on this, that we can get the powers to be to look at least those couple of main groups in the total of the gun deaths and do something about it. And it's more than just creating another law. It's actually putting the funds and resources behind it to get it done, get it taken care of, to bring help and hope back into the society, into the people where it's needed.
Okay, perfect. Now, I'm glad you guys did touch on it while I was struggling with connectivity. Yeah.
Yep.
No, it definitely is an important, topic. And I can't recall the number you said. You said there's about 400 million guns that are in the US.
Yes. Yep.
Correct.
That is one of the
Correct.
most recent figures. Now, when those figures are given, it's okay, how many of those guns are active as compared to, okay, I know people that have guns hanging on their mantelpiece that will never be fired again. Are they counted? Is it just registered guns? And if it's registered, does that mean it's also, able to be fired? And oh, by the way, there are certain antique guns that are still able to be fired that are not registered. And there was a statement given by a Japanese general during World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Later on after the war, they asked the general, why didn't you proceed further into the U.S.? And the general's comment, you guys have too many guns. They know they would have met resistance. And that's a good thing about guns. They're there for protection. They're there to help hunt with. And I'll give you another stat that came right out of the FBI's data with the same data that I've already presented. And that is 1.5 million. That's the number of crimes, if you will, that are prevented every year by a good person with a gun. And the FBI goes further to state that that number could be almost as much as 2x, so 3 million, due to underreporting. And so I don't want to see us go and say, nope, we're rounding them all up, blah, 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 that's it, it's done. No, let's take good, common sense approach to this. We know where the issues are for the major categories. Let's attack that and do something about it. Let's just not go helter-skelter. Nope, okay, this happened over here. Trying to think of that term. Oh, correlation. Correlation does not equal causation. And we need to remember that. And that means just because this is related to this doesn't mean it caused this. But we need to look for those links. And I think by going this 80-20 route of looking at the suicides and looking at the gang-related and doing something about that, we will go a long way to not only making the streets safer, but to giving people hope once again that they can carry on for tomorrow. That's my belief, and I guess that's my message.
I'm going to be like a bit controversial. I can be highly controversial at times, but I'm going to be a bit controversial
Sure.
on this topic. When we look at crime, not just in the States, but all around the world, the FBI, who we are using as an example, because this is where the data has been taken from, do they want to take, guns off the street? Do they want to bring those numbers down? Do they want to bring those suicide numbers down? Because if those things didn't exist in the world that we live in today, they wouldn't have a job.
Well,
you feel me on that? Are they really going to put? Because we know the money is there, we know the resources is there, but they are just deliberately, in my opinion, not doing anything about it. So what do we do? How far can we go as average citizens on the street, to make a difference?
Well, that's where I began to look at, and I haven't done an in-depth study on this, but I began to look at states that have open carry. And there are several of those states with open carry that are extremely safe states. And you can walk into a bar and you can see a person with a gun strapped to their waist. And those are extremely safe areas. Now, are they without problem? No, no. I don't think we'll ever, with human beings, be without problem. But can we minimize that? And that's where I go back to the FBI data that says a good person with a gun has thwarted, 1.5 million. Now think about that. 1.5 million incidences. I don't know if I want to call them crimes right now. They haven't been prosecuted, but instances was prevented from going further. And I'm also reminded of the police officer who pulled a traffic person, breaking the law over, only there was a scuffle and the guy was overpowering the traffic officer and going for his gun. And it took a bystander with a registered legal gun to put an end to it because the guy on top wasn't giving up. And so the other one had to step in. I don't want to prevent those things from happening, but I want to be able to make sure that the folks are properly trained and educated. And I mentioned Remington, and that's that sign behind me. I worked there while I was going to college. And the very first thing any employee goes through during orientation, you went through a gun safety course. You might not even have been working with guns. And in fact, at the plant, they had the process set up where bullets were only there in one area, and that was for the testing of the gun. And those were checked out and checked back in at the end of the night. So we knew everything was accounted for. We weren't allowed down there. I was a machine worker. I wasn't allowed down there. You had to have clearance to get down there. But everybody, regardless, still had to go through. Even if you were an admin, you had to go through a gun safety course. They wanted you to understand that. They wanted you to realize this is a weapon. It's powerful. And you need to treat it as such, and you needed to be very careful with it. But, like most anything else, you want to use it for recreational purposes. Cars are a weapon. We've seen them used. And people go through, get their license. Some people don't. But we're not going to go around and ban cars. And I can tell you, there's been cases where people have suicide by car, driven purposely off a cliff.
Also, carbon monoxide poisoning.
Yes. I should have mentioned that right away. Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to share that, and we all know this, that more than one thing can be true. Yep. Several things can be true. Yep. So that person who is, I'll put this in quotation marks, a good person with a gun preventing further tragedy through use of the gun, that same person can die by suicide.
Yes. Absolutely can. And that's what we need to attack, Diane. How do we do that? And I think programs like yours are a start, but what can we do to broaden that out? How do we get the powers to be to say, look, we have an issue in this country. And Kino, you missed this. I was mentioning to Diane, I was watching a TV commercial last night, and it was for, I believe it was a weight loss drug. And they said one of the side effects was suicide. I mean, it's bad enough we have a lot of pressures in society these days, let alone we're giving out drugs that can enhance it. And I know medication's powerful. I'm on blood pressure medication. I need it as I've got a heart valve that needs to be replaced. It's very powerful, and we need to have them. But how can we put the safeguards? And I guess that's maybe another point to bring up? How can we install more safeguards out there?
Now, sometimes I think of, and I've met parents where this has happened, when their youngster has found an unsecured gun in the home
Yes.
and dies by suicide.
Yes.
And I've thought about, if that happened to my child, I think I'd be at risk of suicide if that
Yeah.
happened.
I-
Because
and-
I would feel this was my responsibility,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
and I'm sure there's all sorts of circumstances to explain what happened, but to live with that regret, it's like, oh my God. So I'm one thing I wonder about is, what are those factors that come into play that that gun is not secured?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And another aspect is, of course, when somebody is feeling suicidal, they're not thinking about, I want to keep myself safe.
Yeah.
That person is not thinking
That's right.
about safety. They're
Yes.
thinking of, how can I end my life now?
Yes.
Right? So we can't rely on that person who has that problem to reach out for help, to secure their weapon, to do any of those things,
Yeah.
because their motivation is to be dead. So
Yeah.
then it becomes, if that person lives with a partner, right, then it becomes the other people that know the person, the quote bystander becoming an upstander
Yes.
in terms of helping that person.
Yes.
Well, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm only hesitant because New York does have a law that if you think somebody is going to do themselves harm, you just call the number and the police will come and they will confiscate the guns. And that's where, on one hand, I can say, oh man, thank goodness. But then here's the other hand. They still leave the person there. They say, okay, go get yourself some help. That's not going to do any good, because a person, if they're really destined to do this and they can't think of anything else, they're going to find another way.
I would challenge that. They may find another way. There's a portion that are not going to find
Okay.
another way.
And I would agree to that too.
Mhm.
I would agree to that too. But on the other hand too, and this is just my own mind, I'm going to lay it all out. You're taking away a right, and what has happened, and it's happened unfortunately more times than not, is an ex, regardless of man or woman, calls up and says, oh yeah, this person's going to do it, go over there, when the person didn't even intend to do anything, had no thoughts about that whatsoever. It's just the other person kind of taking revenge. And that puts a black eye onto these kinds of things. So how can we do this to where it's fair? How can we do it where we're helping? And Diane, something you mentioned brought me back to my second book. My third book, I interviewed another guy for that, where he was an addict, a functioning addict from a very young age. And one night he gathered up all of his drugs and alcohol to end the pain. And so you're absolutely right. They'll do these kind of things. Now, in this guy's case, the good news, he didn't. He didn't for a different reason. And he goes on, becomes sober, and creates the world's hottest pepper called the Carolina Reaper. And now has created now it's the first hottest pepper called Pepper X. And doctors are looking at that pepper for cancer research. It's amazing what hope again can do.
But that links back also to when I was sharing with you about meeting the young person at the counter of the art store and telling me about her mental health history. And in her email, which she was further describing it because she was wanting to be on the podcast, and she's going to be, She said that her DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy counselor, said to her life-changing words. She didn't say things are going to get better. She didn't say that. She said, life is filled with pain and suffering, and you can't escape that. But you can learn to suffer less.
Yes. Yes.
And those words spoke to this young woman because she felt, yes, that's true. I'm suffering. I'm in deep pain. And someone has acknowledged that. They didn't say to me, not that the person says this as a platitude, but it can come across as a platitude, right? The sun's going to shine tomorrow.
Yes.
Right? The person who's experiencing a depth of pain is going to say, you're not seeing me. You're not feeling me. I don't care if the sun is going to shine tomorrow. Let it shine on somebody else because it's never going to shine on me. But the words, I can help you to suffer less. We can ease that pain. That may be something that will resonate with someone.
Oh, absolutely. And now we're getting into the area that we're talking about how people can take in certain information or certain words, and it has more of an inner meaning to them than it might to somebody else. And to me, as you were stating all that, Diane, I was thinking we were told at a very young age, no one's ever promised you a rose garden. There's going to be toil. There's going to be trouble. There is going to be times that you want to pull your hair out. But just understand that the more you endure, the stronger you get. And that was the message we were delivered as kids. Now that resonated with me, but it might not, like you said, it might not resonate with other folks. And so we got to find what does. And so you've just given me something to think about too when I talk to other folks, how to maybe kind of cue into what maybe some of the words that might help them.
This is a big subject and a very, very important one. I'm reading a book by Seth Godin, who's you know of him? He's a marketer, right? Excellent writer. And in my reading the book, of course, I'm thinking about the Hold On campaign. And what he's talking about is really thinking about what does the person you're trying to reach want, right? What promise can you give them, right? Be authentic, right? You can't help everyone, right? Think about the audience in the best use of the word audience. For whom are you serving? Right? Look at it as it is a service. But then as I'm contemplating all this, I was thinking, but the person that we want to reach is a person who wants to be dead and has no hope. Right? So how do you reach that person? Right? And I think that it goes back in some sense, well, we're talking about safety measures, right? Education about gun safety, education about the statistics, education that can be you. That can be you. That can be your loved one. That can be a coworker. There are all these circumstances, right? There's not just one cause of suicide. It's not that a person necessarily has to have a psychiatric illness. And also people who have a psychiatric illness, the vast majority of them are not dying by suicide, right? And also you could say the same thing about terrible traumatic events that ought not to be happening, but they do happen. But the majority of those people are also not dying by suicide. So what are the specific factors right? That can help. And then so that education, what you're talking about, having gun, a secure place, separating the bullets, all these things, being sure at all times to have that gun secured, especially when there are children, right? And not to imagine that your kid doesn't know the code for opening the
safe or
box, because they can.
Yes. And I don't know how much of this, Diane, is being brought into the schools. And the reason I mention this, as an author, I sit on a lot of different author groups. And we just had what they call a deep dive this weekend, where folks who have written books come in and tell us their journey, etc. And the one guy who's written one on, it's called Financial Epiphany. And he's now in the schools teaching kids this, of how to be good with their finances, how to handle money, and the power of multiplication of that money. That's a great education for young people. Can we do something similar with gun safety and suicide? Can we make it not so much the taboo? When I was in high school, my God, we had a class. It was a speech class, and we had to give a presentation on a hobby of ours. One of our classmates brought in his gun and gave a whole presentation on it, the safety of it, all this kind of stuff. That guy later went on to be a clergy. But I mean, here he came into the school with it. Nobody batted an eye. Today, oh my God, he'd be wrestled to the ground. The cops would be called, and maybe the National Guard. We've got to remove the taboo and get the education to flow once again.
And there are programs, in perhaps middle schools and high schools. There definitely are, and then in colleges as well, workplaces sometimes. However, something more needs to be done. The second leading cause, and let me see if I got this correct. I hope I'm correct on this. I believe it's the second leading cause of death of college-age students is suicide.
I can believe that. I had I still have my daughter-in-law. I'm not kidding, when she was in college and she went to Brown and she went for her master's degree, the pressure that sometimes are put on them, and not just by the school, but even by themselves. I can understand why suicide could be high, and what can we do about that? I mean, there has to be. Again, these folks have to know these statistics. And why can't we do something about that? And that's the problem I have. I've always been a person that said, hey, look, this is broken over here. Let's do something. In my older age, I say it's broken over there. Let's hire someone to fix it. But that's now. But back then, I rolled up my sleeves and I did whatever we needed to do to fix whatever it was, be it anything in the house or anything on the car, etc. Why don't we do more of that stuff now? And I don't have an answer. I'm just asking the question.
I wonder, and this is just my wondering, if our tolerance for being in emotional pain, is that tolerance shortening, right? Like it becomes intolerable sooner. And is in any way, is that related to, I don't know, the shortening of our attention span with social media, right? That things have to, if I'm in a very bad way, it's horrible, right? I need time to let that settle, right? I need to give it time, and things will change. I could do something, circumstances will change. But if I can't tolerate it, You know what I mean? My tolerance, I can't continue to pay attention to this. I have to turn the channel.
Yeah.
Or in this case, I have to turn the channel off. You know, off the end, death is my only option. I wonder if that in any way plays a role in this. I mean, sometimes you hear about in the news, and again, I don't have one-on-one familiarity, so there's so much information that we're not privy to. But you read in the paper, just even recently, there was a preteen, right, experiencing bullying, right? 10-year-old died by suicide.
Yeah.
And just horrifying. Now, I don't know if a gun was involved, right, in this circumstance, but this can happen in a loving family,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Where that young person or that adult is loved. They want you to talk to them, right? But in that moment of intense despair, the person doesn't want to reach out. They don't think that anybody does love them, even though they do, right? Or in a distorted way of thinking, the person can think, nobody loves me, or I'm a burden, they're better off without me. The thinking gets all clouded and toxic related to the terrible event that's gone on, or perhaps the person does have a psychiatric illness, right? They're having a depressive episode. They're not eating, they're not sleeping, or their sleep pattern is too much. Constant thoughts of suicide. A person could even become psychotic, delusional, hallucinations, and that's contributing, to their demise. But again, as we both said, holding on, not acting on that thought, is key to staying alive for the next moment. And then if you have moment after moment, then having that influx or outflux of getting help becomes the way to survive.
Now, you really got me thinking about a lot of things, and I do agree. I believe the attention span issue is one we need to address. As I was reading the other day, that as we're getting faster and faster, and that means shorter and shorter things popping up, we're getting that quick little dopamine hit, boom, 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 boom. And then if we're without it for a while, do you start the shakes and all this? And whoa, wait a minute. Now we're talking more getting into a person's psyche and evaluating what the environment or how the environment is impacting that person. Boy, and that brought me back to like 8th grade science when I started to make that connection. But it could very well be that they're not getting that dopamine hit, and all of a sudden they go into a downer state. And I mean, the world's weight is on their shoulders, and that's it. I just got to end this all and do something. Back in when I was younger, when you felt like that, you usually had a group of friends you would then just go and hang out with. And we would either play something or we'd just sit around and chat, that kind of stuff. That's not happening today because why? They go to their phone, clicky, clacky. And if the person's not there, nobody's around. Just go back to your words. Nobody loves me. And maybe technology is playing a bigger role now than we might want to admit. Just some thoughts as you were talking, were coming to
Yes, yeah. I think that it's true. All right. I think it's almost a misnomer when we talk about social media because it can create asocial.
Yes.
And antisocial.
Yes. Now, and even myself, I'm on the computer quite a bit, but I'm doing a lot and I'm involved with a lot out there. I mean, I could come in here into my office, and next thing you know, it's 8 hours later, and I've been on the PC all day. I'm retired, but I'm doing stuff on different book groups. I'm also engaging with different folks for different things out there. I do have a large social media contact. I mean, right now I'm still growing my followers. I'm over 1,100 followers, or just about 1,100 followers right now, and it's been growing. But that's what I use and keep myself entertained, occupied, informed. I mean, and it's not just that they'll say something, I'll say, okay, let me write that down and go research that. I've always been big into research. That was part of my job too in the last 15 to 20 years of my career. I needed to do a lot of research for the job. So I learned to really enjoy it and to dig in deep to find the information. Don't just take the first thing you see, dig deeper. And when you think you dug deep enough, keep going, because I guarantee you're going to find another layer down there. So this information, when people tell me, I'll just jot it down and I may, okay, that sounds reasonable, but I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm going to check this out further and see if there's something else going on. And when it comes to this subject, Diane, of suicide, there is so many different layers for different folks. There's not going to be any one cure-all, but I do believe there has to be more done.
You know, I know in my own experience, because when I was in medical school, I had attempted suicide and was medically hospitalized for that. And my intention was to be dead. I took an overdose of a prescribed medication. And being a medical student, I knew what I was taking. And that has impassioned me, to help save lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe if I had a gun next to me when I was thinking that way, I wouldn't be here talking to you today.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
And in that terrible state of mind, I was not thinking at all how this was going to impact my parents, my sister and brother, my dorm mate at the medical school, right? That was not in my mind at all. But in terms of my own healing, I would say in part a spiritual belief has helped me, and that has been that there's a part of me that's not me. Right? It's like the S, the capital S for self, and the smaller s for me, the tiny self.
Mm-hmm.
And at times I've been able to say to myself, the small s, like, you are feeling terrible, you are in pain, you have made perhaps a terrible error, right, that you're feeling so bad about. But there's a part of you, right, which is that higher power who knows, who's not in pain, who knows what to do.
Yes.
And try to rest in that self.
Yes. And I was going to ask if you think the folks who have gone away from any kind of a religious sector, if you will, be it anything from Christianity to further other Judaisms to whatever it may be, if that also plays a part here. And as you were stating that with a large S and a small s, it reminded me, and this is a quote I used in my last book: we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And when you think about that, and when you let it come across you, there is something more and greater, and we're part of it. And to not realize the full extent of that is that something that you're going to miss out on if you don't hold on that one more day, that one more hour. So,
Too, from what you were saying, Kevin, about feeling that I am of value, right? That I was created as someone who already has value in them,
yes,
which will be further manifested. It may not have happened yet, but
yes.
it's going, just like, the metaphor and reality of the seed and the oak tree, right?
Mhm.
The oak tree is in the seed, but
Yes.
it needs to grow.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And a very, very powerful metaphor when you think about that. And as you were talking about that, I have 2 celery stalks right now on my kitchen counter island, if you will, which were showing our grandkids how you can take a celery stalk, just a little piece of it, and get it to grow into new celery. And they're watching it every time they come over. How much more has it grown, Grandpa? How much more? Look how this is going to grow up, and it's going to nurture someone.
That idea of my life has meaning, and I'm not saying that the purpose of suffering is to have meaning,
Oh,
because
no.
sometimes there are terrible, atrocious events that ought not ever to have occurred.
Exactly.
And they're not, and I believe it's not because you're going to grow from them, right? Right? That may be a byproduct of your own doing, but that's not a reason for this terrible thing to
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
Right? But the idea of my life has value, I have meaning, I can make meaning from my life, right? That there's a purpose, that there's a point, because people start to think there is no value, there is no point to my life, right? There's no purpose. The world is better off without me, and I'm better off without the world, right? So if there's any way to be able to hold on through faith, through family, through thinking, what potentially can I do for someone else in a good way? Now, again, if you're in a terrible state of mind, you may not be able to do that at all. But there may be some circumstances where a person may be able to think, my death is going to harm someone, right? Or they're going to find my body, and that's going to be so horrific for them. I don't want to do that. Again, people in that depressed, suicidal state of mind may not at all be thinking, that person that hanged themselves is not thinking, oh my God, someone's going to find me that way.
Right.
But if there's any way that we can nurture that sense of meaning, that I think that's part of the hope too.
Yeah. Yes.
Because I think the pain will continue if we don't see a role that we have. Maybe the role becomes, I lived through this and I want to tell you what helped me. It may not help all of you, but maybe 1 or 2 people, my words are going to be powerful, right? Said in a humble way. Like I wanted to kill myself. I attempted killing myself, and I lived through it. And maybe I lived through it so I can tell my story to you.
Yeah. Now, all of these are powerful messages that we need to bring out more and more. And it goes back to what we've talked about is we need a larger platform. We need more of the and for lack of any other terms, my mind isn't clear on this right now as far as a name, but the power brokers to get behind and help with these launches and everything we spoke about, more into the schools, etc. And in the different institutions need to understand these stats, not just poo-poo them, but understand this is real. This is reality.
Yes, it is
Regardless,
reality. Mhm.
regardless of correlation, causation, this is reality.
Kevin, I had an idea as you were speaking.
Sure.
There could be gun stories, the title, gun stories. And then it would be stories of guns and suicide. Stories of guns and domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, you're shining a light on sharing those stories.
Yep.
Right? It's almost like potentially, hey, audience, I am you and you are me. And I want
Yes.
to tell you what happened in my life.
Yes.
That one, I don't know the cause of the murder, homicide. What's the number one cause of the death? But do you know that, and I think I may be getting this stat right, that the number one cause of death in pregnant women is murder?
I wow. I just have to shake my head at that. I mean, and I'm just thinking for myself, and I don't want to try to project into other people's lives from mine, but that was the most joyous time when I knew my wife was pregnant and we've got 2 children and I couldn't wait to hold them. And we didn't have a whole heck of a lot of money at all, but we have, and we're bringing in a new life. And that was going to be a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun too. So I can't even begin to think of, a woman being murdered when she's pregnant. I mean, that's so far from my thought process.
And on the other side, in terms of relationship breakups, right?
Yes.
And I'm not necessarily including anything about domestic violence here. Just a relationship. People loved each other. Now somebody or both of them potentially are hating each other, right?
Yes.
Or one is angry, the other one still wants to be in the relationship. Whatever. There's problems. They're breaking up. That can be a trigger to suicide.
Yeah.
It can also be a trigger to suicide, murder.
Yeah. Which
Murder, suicide.
Yeah, which in my cousin's case was.
So I'm going to say, if you have any interest, and you may or may not, but I'm just throwing it out there, that if you might be interested and are including in our Talking Back to Suicide, having periodically gun stories, right? Weapons and suicide, right? I think we would welcome that.
Okay.
I think that it's important to shine that light on it, and to be not hesitant, and I know neither of us are, but not hesitant in just saying like what it is.
Yes.
Guns and suicide. Let's talk about it.
Exactly. And it's the type of thing where, and again, this comes from writing my 3rd book, where I got to say, Diane, yeah, I had interesting circumstances, but I never put a lot of the pieces together until I wrote the book. I believe we are sent different messages to act upon. And as I was thinking about this, the message of this all of a sudden showed up. I wasn't doing any research on it, but all of a sudden this shows up one day. Why? Because it's something we need to talk about. So I will be open to, if I'm starting to receive and see those kinds of messages where I'm hearing more and more about it, to say, wait, okay, time out. Okay, I'm getting the message. I'm going to get involved in this. So yes, it's definitely open. for me to think more about this and come back onto the show. I'm not opposed to it in any way, shape, or form, because we can't just speak about something and say others need to do it. Sometimes we need to start doing it ourselves.
There's going to be another guest who's coming to the show. His first name is Stephen. I think his last name is Schneider. I met Stephen at an American Foundation for Suicide Prevention sponsored Action Advocacy Day, which happens across the United States, and people meet with members of the legislature, right, and talk to them about suicide. And Stephen was at that event. I had never met him before, and he works for a gun association here in Oregon, and they have a suicide prevention program within the gun association.
Oh, cool.
So I'll be sure also to mention to him about our conversation.
Absolutely.
About this idea to include guests that can share their story. And I maybe there's already a documentary about this, but I'm going to look it up and see if there's documentaries talking about specifically about guns and suicide.
Absolutely. And as you were talking about that, it just brought up another thing to mind. 911 operators have to deal with this kind of thing. Could there be some of them out there that might want to speak on that and what comes across, and how some of the stories, and I don't want to say turn negative, but I want to say turn positive. Yeah. And can we bring some of that more to light? There's a lot of negative out there, so I'm trying to shy more and more away from that and look at things more from the positive side, because frankly, I think we need a lot more positive news out there.
Another idea that popped in my head that came from what we're talking about is that there can be suicide by cop.
Yes.
And
yes.
I would imagine that very often involves the not necessarily a young person, but the person in extreme mental distress having a gun, and they're pointing the gun at the police.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the police are saying, put the weapon down, et cetera, and the person is not complying. And then unfortunately, they end up dead.
Yep.
Right? So that's another gun story around suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know.
And that actually, in my own experience, that happened here in Oregon within the last couple of years. And this may sound strange to you, Kevin, but I think I was leaving my house and I saw that there was, the yellow tape everywhere and police cars, and I knew I couldn't leave my house. And what had happened is very close, walking distance, a block away, right?
Wow.
Near a hospital, which is Good Samaritan Hospital, which is, I'm almost catty-cornered to that hospital.
Okay.
My car was parked on the opposite side of the street where the man who was holding the gun was eventually shot. Okay. And it was all cordoned off, and I was unable to it was a crime scene, so I was unable to get my car. But I remember, and this may sound odd, but I remember almost feeling like my car had witnessed this shooting. I don't know. It was like, I guess I was so shook up about this terrible thing happening, right? And I can remember when I got like a driver to take me to work, right? Because I couldn't take the car. I was telling him all about like this terrible for the man who died, right? And for the police that had apparently the necessity to kill him. And then amazingly, some time passed, and I had a new patient. I'm a retired child psychiatrist,
Oh, okay.
but it ended up one of my new patients. If I'm recalling correctly, it might have been that it was the brother of the father, or it was his relative who had died. Right. And of course, I did not say that I knew
Yeah. Yeah.
that and I lived near there. But
Wow.
the impact of suicide, of course, it's most profound on the person that died, their immediate family, their
Yes.
larger extended family. But the fact of those deaths, right? I think it impacts all of us.
It does. It does. I think when in your circumstance, what I was thinking about at that time, the car still represented part of you. And it's like, yeah, the car was there, but it's like my essence was there too, because I mean, that's mine. And it was right there, and it was that close to me. And I could see how that could have a major impact for sure. And as you were talking, I was thinking, all right, what's the police officer thinking when they go home that night for the actions that they had to do to protect, but didn't want to do?
Isn't there the English author John Donne who spoke of something like, don't ask for whom the bell tolls, right? It tolls for thee.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
That,
yes.
that if you feel that you're part of the human community,
Hmm.
right? We may be called upon to do good in many different ways, but
Absolutely.
certainly suicide and helping to prevent those tragic losses.
Absolutely.
And that grief, that pain-filled grief that the survivors feel.
Absolutely. And I do try to make it a point whenever I see an officer, like my son has a few friends that are officers where we live, and their kids play basketball together. And so my son introduced me to him, and the first thing, I'm shaking his hand, I'm saying, thank you for your service. Because I know a lot of them go through pains like this, and it's not just because of if they see a suicide or if they have to shoot somebody, but they see stuff every day, and it's got to be heartbreaking for them to go out, and they chose this profession, and it's just, I mean, it's not one, I am so thankful they're there, but it's not something I could do. Even though I worked at Remington Arms, the only gun I ever owned in my life was a BB gun. And the only thing I ever did with that was target shoot. So it's not like I want to go out and get a gun and go hunting. That's not part of my nature. But I can understand the folks who do. I can understand why they do that. It's and I can understand even why police went into that line of work, but I can't understand what might go through their mind if some tragedy happens because of it.
I'm not going to quote this overall correctly, perhaps, but recently, this goes back within the last 2 weeks or so, 2 to 3 weeks, I read about within the course of maybe a 2-week time frame in a certain state, the United States, there were 4 suicide deaths of people within the police force.
Yeah, that's very high rated in police force
Yes.
out there. Very high. I mean, anyone that I consider a first responder, from
Yes.
military all the way down, very, very high up in the categories. And again, I give them their due and tip my hat to them, because I could not do what they do, and just don't understand all that they go through. But it is a lot, And if any way I can make it easier on them, so be it. That's what I'll do. But if we can help them further, uh, I'm not sure how to do that, but I think a lot of stuff that we talked about here today are good first steps. And
Makes me think to invite someone from the police force on this
yes,
podcast as well, because a large part of talking back to suicide, I also want to educate myself. I want to understand more,
well,
or all of us to understand more, so we can do more. That's
one of the
beneficial.
things I would like to see, Diane, and I don't know if you've ever run across it. I haven't done the research, but what's been the suicide curve over the years? And I'm sure it's probably going up. I know for guns and gun related, it's been fairly steady. And when I say steady, total gun deaths are 70 to 90,000, and that's been for quite a number of decades. And the suicide rate still remains quite high within that band.
And women, what has gone up is women using guns to end their life. That's been increasing. And I think it may be now in par with what men do, whereas before it wasn't.
Do you think part of that might be of how quick it is as compared to taking pills or doing something else?
This is just my hypothesizing that I would think yes.
Yeah.
But again, I will definitely follow up with what this conversation has engendered, in terms of learning more and bringing on guests that can speak to this.
I hope my ramblings have given at least some information that's useful.
Oh, a lot of information, Kevin. How can we learn more about you and the books that you've written?
Sure. Kevin-Hall, that's HALL.com. And you can go right there, and it has all the information about me. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Reddit. I am not on Instagram. I am not on TikTok. And that's been done purposely. Although the more and more I get involved with being an author, more and more folks are saying you should at least have an Instagram account. And it may be something I'll look at in the future. But for right now, Kevin-Hall.com. Check it out. I'm into writing my fourth book, which is entirely different. Once again, it's now it's a how-to book. I write because I enjoy doing it. And the first two were memoir books, memoir history. And it's because my grandkids, they were always asking me, what were you like as a grandpa, Dad? Or, as a grandpa. And I'd tell them, and not knowing if they remember the stories, I started to write them down. And now I kind of look at it, that's my legacy. I don't plan to be buried with a gravesite. I plan to be cremated at this point. At least they'll have the books that they can remember me by. They won't necessarily go to a gravestone and, have discussions. They can sit around in their living room with the book and tell their kids about it. So that's kind of me in the nutshell, why I started writing. And now I'm 4 books in, and who knows how many more to go.
Yes, all the stories in you. I want to thank you so much, Kevin. You really
Diane,
shed a light and also opened up a conversation about guns, right? Guns,
yeah,
suicide, and preserving life.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I appreciate the opportunity you having me come on. I hope I have folks listening to this, like you've mentioned, Diane, hold on one more minute, one more hour, one more day. Seek out friends, seek out the church. Go to the fire department, go to the police, talk to them. There's an ear out there that will listen. And that's, I think, the best I can do for at least right now.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.